Beautiful, beautiful. Wow. Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Coleman and Leanne. Magnificent. All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday to you. My notes are missing. Oh, there they are. Wow, awesome. Got to have a little faith, right? Oh, what a treat. Well, I heard this last week, and maybe you heard, I don't know, but the Supreme Court ruled that there won't be a nativity scene on the Capitol Hill this Christmas season. It's not a religious decision at all. It's just they couldn't find three wise men in the Capitol. Oh my God, it's bump up. Oh. Well, let me ask you something. They're still laughing in the booth over there. Well, we're in the Christmas season. We're actually in the season of Advent, which is a time where we are actually preparing for the birth of the Christ. And it's a beautiful time, and it's a time about a spiritual journey, and it's a spiritual journey that is all of us are on, and it's about our own unique spiritual journey and our soul's unfoldment and development, and that every part of it actually has some aspect of our own consciousness. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and explore that today, but I want to ask you a question. Is there anyone here today that does not have an ego? Raise your hand. I put mine down, as you noticed. Well, good. I'm in the right audience. Because, you know, if you didn't raise your hand, then you recognize that you have an ego. We all have an ego. And if you did raise your hand, it also kind of points out that either you don't know you have an ego, or you have an ego and your ego doesn't want you to know you have an ego, or you've overcome and transformed your ego so that your ego is actually a servant of your divine nature. And ultimately, that's what we're really working toward, is allowing that ego consciousness to not necessarily disappear or go away, but to be transformed and to be allowed to be an instrument of our unique spiritual nature. I came across this wonderful quote from a Sister Lenora Black in the Catholic Digest. She said, "Advent is less a matter of our waiting for God to come than of God waiting for us. For God is already at the door, knocking. We have but to open the door of our hearts to let God in." And I'm going to suggest to you that there's some truth in that, but I see it a little bit differently. We only have to open the door to let God out. Because God is already knocking at the door of our heart to get out. And to get out, I mean to be expressed outwardly, to be released, to be revealed, and to be shown, and to be radiated. That our divine nature is already a part of us. And it's just always in the process of knocking at the door of our hearts, our consciousness, to be expressed in some way. The wonderful mystic Thomas Merton said, "The Advent mystery is the beginning of the end in all of us that is not yet Christ." Let me say that again, because I love what he's expressing here. The Advent mystery is the beginning of the end in all of us that is not yet Christ, that is not yet expressing that unique divine nature. And so it's about a journey of us moving through those stages and awarenesses and levels of energy and consciousness that are not yet reflecting that divine nature in our life and world. And so this week we're going to read from chapter 2 of Luke. "Now it came to pass on those days there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be enrolled. This was the first enrollment made when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all who went to enroll themselves, every one to his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Judea, and to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, to enroll himself with Mary, who was his betrothed to him, being great with child." When I think about our consciousness and what we see and experience in our lives, one of the things that Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, many of you may be aware that Charles Fillmore was actually a real mystic. He had a real understanding that each and every one of us had that divine connection. And he was one who really focused on that divine connection and really spent his time, a lot of his time, in prayer and meditation to help express more of that divine nature himself. Charles Fillmore was also a metaphysician. And a metaphysician is one who understands that what we see and experience out here in the world is a reflection of something that's going on within us. Now, those two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. I would suggest to you that Unity is a place where mysticism and metaphysics really come together. That we're really here to experience our unique divine nature and also to understand and to really grow from our understanding and awareness of all the things going on out here in the world and the reflection they are within our own being, within our own consciousness. And so we are learning and growing in a way to really train our energy and our consciousness to be able to experience more of these awarenesses about what's happening in our life. I'm going to suggest to you that when something shows up in your life, it shows up because it's something that's already in your consciousness. We have a tendency to think it's the other way around. We have a tendency to think that something shows up and then it goes into our consciousness. But I'm going to suggest to you from a metaphysical, spiritual understanding, it's the other way around. It's in our consciousness on some level, in some way, and it may be something that is from what we call our race consciousness, which is our collective consciousness. We all have an unconsciousness that really taps into a greater sense of mind, of consciousness. And so we may be bringing things up from the race consciousness, but when they show up in our lives, they're showing up because on some level it's coming up into our subconscious mind, and at times it comes up into a conscious awareness. And oftentimes one of the ways that we actually help transmute and transform a lot of the things that are going on in our lives is by allowing things to come from that subconscious level of our mind up into our awareness, into our consciousness, so that we can shine the light on it and so we can see it more clearly. So what happens in our life, the people that show up, the things that show up, the experiences that show up, is a reflection of something within our own thinking and feeling and conscious or unconscious or subconscious energy. The people that are sitting next to you wouldn't be sitting next to you unless they somehow showed up in a level of energy and consciousness within you. And even if they did, you wouldn't see them. You wouldn't see them. You wouldn't have the energy and the consciousness and the vibration to be able to recognize them. You follow? And that's a good thing. Even those ones that push our buttons, yes. The ones that we just as soon didn't show up. They're there because there's something in us that they are showing us and reflecting to us. And so when we look at the Bible, when we look at Scripture, it's not just a story that happened thousands of years ago, but it really is a story that is reflective of something that's within every one of us. And so we're learning how we can look at these awarenesses of the different characters and actions that are happening in the Bible that are showing us how we can really awaken to a richer and fuller understanding of our own unique divine nature. So when I look at this verse and the story of the birth of Jesus and everything leading up to it, we're actually on a spiritual journey to expose and to explore more of those unique divine natures. When he says, "Now it came to pass in those days there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus," and I was looking at some of Charles Fillmore's understandings and metaphysical awarenesses about this, and one of the things he says, of course, is to decree is to ordain something or to command it, and to establish and to fix this idea in that substance out of which all things are formed and shaped. And so think about that for a moment, and then think about this idea of Caesar and Augustus. And when we look at Caesar, we realize that Caesar is a ruling energy, you might say, or that which is at least wanting to be in charge or control. Metaphysically, the individual consciousness or the personal consciousness implies the joint activity of our intellect and our will. So I want to take a second and ask you something to think about. You remember I asked you if you had an ego. Well, take a moment and let's just let yourself be conscious and aware of that part of you that wants to be in charge. Anybody have that? I'm going to suggest to you we all have that. We want to be in charge. We want to be in control. And this is what the Caesar Augustus is reflective of. It's that consciousness within us that's trying to be in charge of the world. So the decree was this, that all the world be enrolled. And what that metaphysically means is that all of our world, specifically our world, represents all of the things that are going on out here, that all of that be under our control. Anybody ever felt like you wanted to have things run the way you think they ought to be run? No. It would be best for everyone if everything just went the way I think it's supposed to go, right? This is our Caesar Augustus consciousness. This is that part of us that's really trying to get the world to get it fit into the mold of our own thinking and belief systems and how we think life is supposed to be. Now, I know nobody here has that, but I have to confess that I've got some of that. I like things to be the way I like them to be. And, you know, I'm sometimes get a little bit of gratification when they show up that way. There's a part of me that celebrates, you know. That's that ego consciousness also, by the way. But, see, there's a part of us that understands and that doesn't necessarily resist that in us. And so let's go on a little further. Let's look at... This was the first enrollment made when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Now, Quirinius actually is another aspect of that part of us that's really in charge, that wants to be in charge and running things, right? And so we're looking at these symbols just like they were a part of our dreams, just like people that show up in our lives actually represent something to us. These represent something to us. And we sometimes think that they're just stories, but they really are a reflection of something. I'm going to share with you, you wouldn't be hearing this today if there wasn't something in you that this reflects. You follow me? So when we look at Augustus and we look at this, it's basically, Augustus is the worship of the will ruling in selfishness and directed by human reason. It's our ego consciousness. It's our personal will. It's our desire to have everything out here be in that state that we want it to be. And so when we go into it a little further, we realize that it's hard for me to say his name, Quirinius. Boy, that's an interesting name, isn't it? Quirinius is governor of Syria, and it was at the time of the world when Jesus was born. So metaphysically, Charles Fillmore says it's a phase of the executive power and personal will established in the mistaken belief that peace can be obtained by force. Anybody ever had an experience where the world wasn't the way you wanted it to be? And had this sense or this feeling that you were going to make sure that it was, and you were going to do whatever it took to do that, including using force? Now, I'm not saying you use force, but I'm saying you have this impact, or impulse. This impulse to make the world fit the way you think it's supposed to be. Now look at that within yourself. Just be honest. We all have that on some level. We think that we can shape the world out here the way we want it to be, don't we? And there's a part of us that tries to do that. And we can take that to the extreme that we actually do use force to be able to do that. And so part of what this story is about is how to step out of that consciousness where we think that we need to use force to get the world to fit into the mold of our own thinking about it, and to shift, as Dr. Hawkins says, and move into an energy of power. How many of you are familiar with Dr. Hawkins' work? It's a fantastic work. If you never really had a chance to look at this and explore this, it's just deeply spiritual in my opinion, and it's very practical as well. But there's a difference, you see, between force and power. And the difference, of course, really has to do with that ego consciousness. That our ego consciousness is only knows how to use force to try and change things. But when we really tap into our unique divine nature, it's more of, how you can tell whether it's coming from your ego. If there's a need to control, it's coming from your ego. That's pretty simple, really. Not always easy to recognize because we get really immersed in that need to control, don't we? And we think that that's the way that we can have our life be the way we want it to be. But what Dr. Hawkins teaches us, that really power comes from the ability to allow whatever we want to experience in our life to come forth. And so there's a difference between the need to control and make something happen and the ability to simply allow what we envision and what is our highest energy and awareness to rise and to come through us, through our thinking and through our emotions and through our then choices and actions and decisions. Great stuff, great stuff. So when we look at this, we're looking at moving from that energy of the ego consciousness. And Syria, the country of Syria has a metaphysical significance also. It's a country called Aram, north of Palestine, and sometimes it's associated with Assyria or Babylon. And metaphysically, it's the intellect. Intellectual pride. You would say it's basically this ego idea that we somehow that our intellects can somehow make our experiences in our lives be the way we want it to be. Anybody here have an intellect? Of course, we all do. See, the intellect is really our thinking processes. It is in and of itself just this idea that our thinking mind is what is really in charge. That's a part of our ego consciousness also, whether we realize it or not. Sometimes we don't recognize the intellect because we think we are the intellect. Does that make sense? It's kind of like a fish that doesn't recognize that they're a fish and doesn't recognize they're in the ocean because they're submersed in it and immersed in it. So when we're immersed in our intellect, we don't always recognize that. We don't always see that understanding. And so we're actually looking through the eyes of someone who is immersed in the identity of our intellect. See, our ego consciousness and our intellect is really a concept and a belief system about who we are. Does that make sense? And when we're immersed in that and we believe that, then that's how we see ourselves and we experience ourselves. So it's a part of our consciousness that is using our rational mind to try and fix and change and work things out. Does that make sense? All right, so when we look at this, we'll go back to the verse here again a minute. And the command all went to enroll themselves, everyone to his own city. Now, metaphysically, cities, according to Charles Fillmore, has to do with centers of energy in our, not only in our physical bodies, but in our emotional and our, you might say, our psychic and our spiritual bodies. We have a body that is more than this physical body. You realize that? Sometimes we don't remember that. Sometimes we think that we are these bodies. And we identify so much with these bodies that we think that that's the real of us. But I'm going to suggest to you that you can close your eyes and see yourself in a particular way, and you can feel an energy that is more of a spiritual, emotional energy body that is within all of us. And our bodies don't stop here with the physical part of us. But the physical part of us is not separate from those energies that are within us, that they're all a part of the same. This physicalness is actually an energy in itself. And the etheric body are the energies of the thinking and the consciousness that we have about being in a body. That make sense? And so there's an energy body that we all have, and you can see this and feel it. A lot of times people see, you can see the energy around others. Sometimes people see auras. Sometimes you can just feel them. If you rub your hands together, you ever done these exercises where you rub your hands together and you can begin to feel the energy? And so there's a body that exists beyond the physicalness of our body. And there are centers within these bodies. And Charles Fillmore had an understanding that we have 12 divine ideas that are connected to these energy bodies. I won't go into all the 12 powers at this point, but we've talked a little bit about the 12 powers, and the full expression of all of those different 12 powers are an expression of this unique divine nature, this Christ nature that is within us. And there's a unique connection and a center within every one of these. This is also really connected to this whole the idea of chakras. How many of you are familiar with the chakras we talk about? And much in the Hindu tradition, they talk about the energy body, and they talk about the chakras. And they say that there's 7 chakras, but they also, if you look at some of the more esoteric works, they say that there's 7 main chakras, but there's 5 additional sub-chakras that are in a sense, subsets of that. Well, 5 and 7 is 12. And Charles Fillmore studied these himself for many years, and he understood that there are actually 12 divine centers within each one of us, that we're all expressing through these in some way. And so part of our unfoldment into our divine nature is also an exploration and a growing in these different qualities that are coming forth. A city represents one of these different energies, places. He says, metaphysically, it's a fixed state of consciousness or aggregation of thoughts in the various nerve centers of the body. And the presiding or central thought meaning of a city is found in the significance of its name, combined with that of the man or tribe or country or nation with which it is mentioned. So there's a consciousness that is centered within our physical nature and also within our energy body and our energy nature as well. And so when we look at Mary and Joseph, the parents of Jesus, they represent wisdom and love. Where do you experience wisdom in you? In the heart, perhaps. Yeah. Charles Fillmore seemed to think that it actually was more of the gut. You get a gut feeling about things. Everybody ever had a gut feeling about something? That sometimes our awareness, our wisdom comes through that place within us that is really connected to a place within us that is also connected with our world very directly. And so part of what we're really working with here, and I shared this a little bit last week, part of what the birth of the Christ really represents is the coming together of both our spiritual nature and our human nature. And so we are connecting in a way on a deeper level. And Joseph represents that connection that we have. It also represents an awareness of understanding. It's a place where we can truly experience more of an awareness of a knowing. And then Mary represents a manifestation of divine love. It's the motherhood principle. It's the motherhood of nurturing, of compassion, of caring. And it's through these that we are actually able to open up even more to our unique divine nature. Now, one of the things I shared earlier is that Caesar made a decree, and basically Joseph and Mary didn't resist. They went along with it. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. I thought, you'd think that, wisdom would say, well, that's just the ego trying to control. But to me, it also represents that you don't necessarily need to resist the ego. We have a tendency to try and find, when we do have some awareness about our ego, we try to get rid of it. We try to hide from it. We sometimes try to do the opposite. We become oppositional. But in reality, that's just our ego. Because, our spirit doesn't resist. It doesn't necessarily have to resist. It doesn't need to resist. It allows. And again, there's the difference between power and force. Real power is not necessarily trying to resist our ego consciousness. And you don't transform the ego consciousness by trying to get rid of it, beat it up, change it. You actually transform it by allowing wisdom and love to pour through you for that part of yourself, having compassion, knowing you have an ego, accepting that, being gracious with it, being honoring of it, but also recognizing it doesn't necessarily need to be running the show. But they went along and they wound up going to the place of their birth, that center within themselves, which we refer to as, let me back up here a second. Joseph was, actually let me find my spot again here. So they went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth. They went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Judea, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem. So, coming out of the city of Galilee, Galilee metaphysically means it's emotional energy. It's a rolling, turning, a ring or circle, a band or a circuit, rolling energy, momentum. It's emotional energy. So metaphysically, it really represents a place within us where our energy is actually in a little bit lower state. He goes on to say that Nazareth, interestingly enough, means watched, guarded, defended, preserved. And Nazareth was a despised place. It was a place, and as such, would be a type of inferiority. It was considered a community of commonplace. And it was disreputable. It had disreputable people. And there's a quote from Scripture that says, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? So it wasn't a very good place. And so for me, I can recognize this. You hear me talk a lot of times about different energies, that we have catabolic and we have anabolic energies in us. And catabolic energies are those energies that are life depleting, that are actually draining us of our spiritual life. Energies like fear, like doubt, like worry, like judgments. Anybody ever had any of those? Of course, we all have them. And so we're moving, our wisdom and our love is moving to a higher place. And the higher place is Judah. And Judah metaphysically represents praising Jehovah. Praising Jehovah. And so in order for our unique divine nature to be born more and expressed more through us, we move from those lower energies into what we call the anabolic energies. And they move into the city of Bethlehem. Now, Bethlehem, interestingly enough, is the city of bread. And I thought that was kind of interesting, the city of bread. And it actually represents divine substance. And that we're moving into an energy that is life-feeding. Bread is in itself a life-feeding energy. Think about that. Now, if you're kind of like Julie and I are doing, we're trying to stay away from bread these days. At least the gluten part of it. So, but that's because there's a part of that that is not life-feeding for us. And we're trying to really take in those things that are really more life-enhancing. And not just on a physical level, but we're talking about thoughts and emotions and feelings that are moving up into a higher energy and higher awareness. Moving to the city of Bethlehem is symbolic of us taking that time to really let our hearts and our minds focus in and move into an energy of praise for that unique divine nature that is coming forth. And when we do that and we allow ourselves to move into that higher vibrations of love, of acceptance, of comfort, of joy. Anybody heard those terms around Christmas? That we're actually allowing the Spirit of the divine to move through us in a more significant and unique way. And so these are all a story about our consciousness and how we can train our consciousness in such a way that we are moving into a place where we are celebrating our unique divine nature, because the reality is we do need to celebrate it in order for it to shine, in order for it to resonate through our nature. We have to honor it. We have to be willing to look at not only allowing it to bless those parts of us that want to be in control, but allowing something that is more significant, more powerful, to move through us. And that transforms our lives, and it transforms the world. That's the real power that you and I have. We have the power, not necessarily to change everything that's going on out here, but when we change our energy and our consciousness about what's going on out here, it changes what goes on out here. When we can see from a place of consciousness of our own unique divine nature and let that flow through, it makes a difference. It has a power, and things are transformed. They may not be transformed in the way that we think that they have to be, because that's, again, the voice of our ego consciousness. But when they're transformed in a way that's even sometimes beyond what we think it has to be. And so I'm going to invite you during this season to take some time to meditate on and to reflect on some of these symbols that we have, not only the symbols that we have in the Christmas story, but think about and reflect on some of the symbols that you have in your life. The people sitting next to you, the people that you're working with, the people that you are living with, the people that you are having a life with, because they're there to be a part of helping us to wake to our possibility and to allow that unique divine nature to express through us in ways that we perhaps had not seen and experienced before. And so I invite you to come back next week, and we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to swaddle our Christ child, and what it means for our Christ child to be born in a manger, and what it means to not be born in the end. Hope you'll join us. Let's move into our meditation time. So I invite you to now to just take a moment and breathe deeply into that heart space. Let your heart resonate with the energies of divine love. Just notice where you allow love to flow through you. And notice where you don't allow love to flow through you. And be willing and open to the energies of allowing. Allowing love to be and express through you with wisdom and understanding, and with true power and grace. Let it flow to those places that you perhaps have had challenges and difficulty loving. Because it's in the very act of allowing that energy to flow to those that we allow them to be uplifted and transformed in our awareness to a higher state, to a higher vibration, to at least an energy of acceptance. And from that place, perhaps, to a place where we can allow ourselves to receive whatever gifts they're here to show us and teach us in consciousness. And bring into your awareness those that you find it very easy to love. Perhaps it's a child or a significant other. Perhaps it's some figure that you are aware of. A parent or grandparent perhaps, or someone that you deeply appreciate in life, friend, Just let that energy of love flow through your heart. And see and feel them experiencing the uplifting energies, the catabolic energies, the anabolic energies that are life-enhancing, and releasing those thoughts and feelings that are not life-serving. And feel that energy of life and love flowing through all of the centers of your etheric body, your energy body. Feel them radiating and feeding and nurturing and allowing of faith, of understanding, of willingness and allowing, of life itself. And give thanks. Give thanks for those gifts. Enhancing and being shared through your open heart and mind and full being. Take a nice deep breath. Let yourself be not only in the energy body but in this physical body. Be present here and now. Notice the senses and appreciate them and value them. Take a nice deep breath. Let yourself be fully grounded in your physical nature. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. And so it is.